The first hints of dawn stretched across the prairie, soft pinks and golds bleeding into the horizon, but inside the small ranch house, the air was heavy with tension. The mail-order bride stood near the doorway, her fingers clenched tightly around a small leather bag, her knuckles white from the pressure. Her eyes, wide and wary, scanned the familiar wooden walls of the house she had hoped would feel like home. The night had been long, filled with silence, rejection, and an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. She had expected a warm welcome, perhaps even guidance and support, but instead she had been met with coldness and hesitation, subtle reminders that she didn't yet belong. "I'll leave at dawn," she said finally, her voice trembling but firm. The words were barely more than a whisper, but they carried the weight of her frustration and fear. She had resolved that she would walk away, reclaim whatever dignity she could, and return to the life she had left behind, or at least the semblance of a life she could control. Her small bag, worn from travel and filled with her few belongings, was all she had left to carry with her. She set it on the floor, ready to lift it and step outside, ready to leave the ranch behind before the sun rose fully. The rancher, a man whose presence had always seemed imposing yet somehow protective, stood a few feet away. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, his hands resting casually but firmly on the frame. His face was rugged, lined with years of hard work under the sun, but his eyes were steady and measured. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, calm, and deliberate. "Not alone," he said, and the words carried a weight she hadn't anticipated. They weren't an argument, a demand, or a command, they were a quiet assertion, a boundary set with care rather than aggression. The bride froze, uncertainty flooding her features. She had expected dismissal or indifference, maybe even a curt nod, but not this insistence that she remain, that she not face the prairie alone. Her heart raced as she struggled to process the words. Not alone. It was a phrase that suggested protection, concern, and perhaps, a recognition of her worth that no one else had offered yet. It unsettled her, this mixture of defiance and care, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Outside, the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the windows, brushing the wooden floorboards with warm light and revealing the dust motes dancing lazily in the air. The house smelled faintly of wood polish and lingering traces of morning coffee, a homely scent that contrasted sharply with the tension in the room. The wind brushed through the open windows, carrying the smell of wild grass and the distant smoke of a neighboring farm, reminding her that the world outside continued as it always had, indifferent to her worries, yet full of possibility. The rancher stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor and partially enveloping her. She instinctively drew back, gripping her bag more tightly, but there was no hostility in his approach. Only a steady, careful presence that seemed to say, "I will not let you face this alone." He wasn't trying to control her or trap her, he was offering stability in a moment when her world felt unstable. The realization both frustrated and comforted her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, punctuated only by the soft creak of floorboards and the distant calls of birds greeting the morning. Her chest heaved slightly as she struggled to reconcile her desire for independence with the undeniable truth in his words. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and golden, inviting her to step away, to reclaim her freedom. Yet inside, the quiet authority of the rancher, combined with the faint warmth of the house and the sunlight beginning to creep across the floor, made her pause. Finally, she sank slowly onto the edge of a chair near the door, her bag still clutched in her lap. Her heart was still racing, but the storm of panic that had driven her to speak those words began to subside. The rancher remained nearby, watching silently, neither pressuring nor retreating. In that fragile moment, a quiet understanding began to form, delicate but undeniable. She wasn't abandoned, she wasn't left to face the world alone. Not yet, anyway. The first light of dawn streamed through the doorway, bathing them both in golden hues, signaling the start of a new day, and perhaps the first step toward a fragile, cautious trust. The bride rose reluctantly from the chair, still gripping her small leather bag as the rancher guided her toward a corner of the house where the morning sun filtered softly through the windows. The golden light fell across the floorboards, creating warm pools amidst the shadows, and for a fleeting moment, the room felt less intimidating. She had expected cold indifference, maybe even open rejection, yet here was a man who insisted she remain, insisting that she not face the prairie alone. It unsettled her, made her question her assumptions and her own instincts. The silence between them stretched for a few moments, broken only by the soft creak of floorboards and the distant sound of wind sweeping through the tall prairie grass. Finally, unable to hold back her curiosity and frustration, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "Why? Why not let me leave?" Her gaze flickered to his face, searching for a hint of irritation or cruelty, but all she saw was calm, unwavering concern. "Because the prairie is no place for you to wander alone," he said simply, his voice steady and devoid of judgment. "Not now, not unprepared, not when the sun hasn't fully risen. I won't let you face it on your own." His words were matter of fact, but there was a quiet authority behind them, a sense of experience and wisdom that came from years of facing the harsh realities of life on the ranch. She wanted to argue, to insist that she could take care of herself, but a small voice inside her reminded her that he was right. She wasn't ready, not for the open fields, the shifting weather, or the long walk that awaited beyond the boundaries of this house. Reluctantly, she followed him to a small corner of the kitchen where a simple breakfast had already been prepared. A steaming cup of coffee sat on the wooden table, accompanied by a loaf of bread and a few slices of cheese. She had not expected hospitality, and yet here it was. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, her movements hesitant. She didn't touch the food, her hands still clutching the straps of her bag, but she felt a flicker of gratitude that unsettled her. The act of kindness, so simple and practical, began to chip away at the walls she had built around herself. The rancher moved about with quiet efficiency, showing her the small routines of the house. He filled a kettle with water, stirred the coals in the hearth to add warmth, and adjusted the curtains so the morning sun would light the room. She watched, fascinated despite herself, realizing that each movement was deliberate, patient, and protective. There was no harshness in him, no attempt to dominate or belittle, only a steady, grounding presence that made her feel both cautious and oddly safe. Hours passed slowly as he began to introduce her to the routines of the ranch itself. He showed her how to tend to the animals, how to check the fences, how to care for the horses with patience and precision. She listened intently, absorbing each instruction with a mixture of reluctance and curiosity. With each task, she saw a different side of him, the patience behind the stern exterior, the compassion that guided even the smallest decisions, and the quiet pride in the land he had tended for years. She realized that his insistence she stay had never been about control, it had been about care, about ensuring that she could meet the world safely, with guidance rather than exposure. By midday, the initial tension began to ease. The small acts of guidance, the steady tone of his voice, and the insistence that she not face the prairie alone all worked together to shift her perception. She had expected rejection and distance, yet she found herself confronted with kindness, structure, and a quiet expectation that she could rise to meet it. For the first time since her arrival, she felt a fragile sense of belonging, the beginnings of trust forming in her heart. She realized that rejection had not meant abandonment, it had been a test of patience, a subtle lesson that care sometimes comes disguised as firmness. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the prairie in warm light, she began to understand the rancher's world. The land demanded patience, resilience, and trust, and in witnessing his dedication, she recognized that he had offered her something far more valuable than mere shelter. He had offered guidance, protection, and a chance to belong, not to him alone, but to a world she had been wary of facing. Slowly, reluctantly, she let herself consider that perhaps staying was not a punishment, but an opportunity, and that the dawn she had intended to escape with might instead mark the start of a new beginning. By midday, the air in the small ranch house had shifted. The initial tension between them had softened into a quiet rhythm, as if the land itself had slowed to accommodate them. The bride, once tense and defensive, now moved with a tentative ease, guided by the rancher's patient instructions. He led her outside, pointing out the daily routines that kept the ranch alive, the chores that seemed mundane at first glance but held the lifeblood of the land in every detail. She followed carefully, absorbing his guidance, her previous resentment slowly melting into cautious curiosity. He showed her how to approach the horses, how to read their moods and movements, and how to offer reassurance without fear. She had expected these animals to be wild and unmanageable, symbols of the vast, untamed prairie she had feared, yet under his steady supervision, they became extensions of his calm authority. When she reached out to stroke a horse's muzzle and felt the animal nuzzle back gently, she couldn't help but smile, a small, genuine smile that had been absent for days. The rancher worked alongside her, correcting her mistakes with a soft tone rather than sharp words. He explained the importance of every small action, securing the gates, checking the water troughs, ensuring the fences were strong enough to protect the livestock. Each lesson was a reminder that life on the ranch demanded diligence, patience, and resilience, qualities she had not yet learned to trust in herself. Yet his unwavering presence reassured her that she was not alone. With every step, every shared task, the invisible walls she had built around herself began to crumble. The sun climbed higher, spilling light across the prairie, and the bride found herself pausing to take it all in. The golden fields stretching endlessly, the distant mountains rising in soft shades of blue, the wind carrying the scent of earth and grass. She realized she had underestimated the rancher, not just as a man, but as a guide, a protector, and perhaps even a companion. He had barred the door that morning, yes, but it was not out of selfishness or control, it was out of care, a recognition that the world beyond those walls was unforgiving for someone so unprepared. Finally, after hours of work, they paused to rest. She leaned against the fence, her small bag set aside, and watched the rancher move among the animals, his ease with them a striking contrast to her own hesitance. "I thought you rejected me," she admitted softly, her voice almost lost in the gentle rustle of the prairie grass. He paused and looked at her, a faint smile touching his rugged features. "Rejection isn't abandonment," he said quietly. "I won't send you away, not alone, not unprepared, not ever." The sincerity in his voice struck her in a way words rarely did. She had expected coldness, indifference, even disdain, but instead, she was met with patience, protection, and an unwavering sense of responsibility. Her eyes filled with tears she had been holding back for days, relief, gratitude, and something more she could not yet name. For the first time, she understood that the rancher's actions had not been about control, but about giving her the chance to survive, to learn, and perhaps to belong. The sun now bathed the prairie in a warm golden glow, and she realized that the dawn she had planned to escape with had instead become a moment of awakening. The rancher had barred the door, but in doing so, he had opened a path, one where trust, guidance, and perhaps even unexpected affection could grow.